and gentlemen, we're back again with another amazing tutorial video, and this time we're going to be talking about writing ionic compounds and formulas. So let's get started. So for a little background terminology, ions are elements with a positive or negative charge, and an ion is an element with a negative charge, which means it gained an electron, and a cation is an element with a positive charge, which means it lost an electron. So today we'll be looking at binary ionic compounds. And a binary compound is a compound that consists of only two elements. A binary ionic compound is a compound that consists of a metal and non-metal, and they bond as a result of the attraction between their opposite charges. And the one thing we need to know to write binary ionic compounds is the oxidation number, which is the charge for each element, in order to determine the chemical formula. So let's take a look. We need to determine the ions and make sure charges cancel out to zero. So let's look at our first one. If we look at Na, which is sodium, sodium has a +1 charge when we take a look at our oxidation chart. And then we look at chlorine. Chlorine has a -1 charge when we look at our oxidation chart. So a +1 and a -1 ends up giving us 0. So they cancel out 0, 0. So our chemical formula would be NaCl. So another way we can look at this is we have +1, we have -1, and that will give us a 0. So now let's look at calcium. Calcium has a +2 charge if we look at our chart. And then oxygen has a -2 charge. And once again, we take a +2, -2, and that gives us 0. So these two chemical charges, they bounce each other out. So our chemical formula is CaO, or calcium oxide. Now let's take a look at another one. And this time we're going to use the cross method. So for example, calcium has a +2 charge and chlorine has a -1 charge. So that this means for every 1 calcium, there must be 2 chlorines for the charges to cancel out to 0. So what do we mean? Calcium is +2, chlorine is -1. A +2 and a -1 is not going to give us 0, so we have to add another chlorine. So if we look, we have +2 and we have the -2, and that brings us to 0. Now what we can use is the cross method, which is what my students love to use. And the cross method simply shows, here's calcium and its charge, here's chlorine and its charge, and we're going to do exactly as it says. We're going to cross the charges. So instead of them being superscripts, now we're going to make them subscripts, and we're going to leave the plus and the minus signs off. So now we will have CaCl2. We don't have to put the 1 there because it's already understood that there's 1 calcium. So let's practice a few and use your periodic table to find the charge of each element in order to write the chemical formula for each compound. So ladies and gentlemen, I will give you 1 minute to complete these, and I will pause the video starting now. Great. So we should have our problems figured out or written down by now and solved. So let's take a look at it. So let's go ahead and put our charges first and show that calcium has a +2 charge and sulfur has a -2 charge. So a +2 and a -2 is going to give us 0. So now when we write our chemical formula, it's going to be CaS, since our 2 charges cancel out. So that is calcium sulfide. Let's take a look at our next one. Lithium has a +1 charge. Oxygen has a -2 charge. So now if we're using our cross method, I'll cross my 1 over here and cross my 2 over here. So when we write our chemical formula, it will be Li2O. We need 2 lithiums to cancel out that -2 for oxygen. So this checks out. And then let's look at our last one. We have aluminum, which has a +3 charge. And then we have fluorine, which has a -1 charge. Using our cross method, we have aluminum, we have fluorine, and we're just going to cross our charges. make them subscripts. So now when we write it, AlF3 or aluminum fluoride. So ladies and gentlemen, if you got yours like this, then you did yours absolutely correct. Good job. So now let's talk about naming binary ionic compounds. To name a binary ionic compound, first we need to write the name of the first element. And then second, we write the first part of the second element, but end it with the suffix IDE. So for example, Na, which is sodium, we write the name of the first element. And then if you look on that second element, the second element is chlorine, but instead of putting the INE, we put an IDE at the end of it. So that's how you write binary ionic compounds. You write the name of the first element, and then you write the first part of the second element, but you end it with the suffix IDE. So now let's practice a few. So I will give you 1 minute to go ahead and practice a couple, and I will pause the video starting now. Great. So at this point in time, ladies and gentlemen, I know you all got yours written down. So let's go ahead and get started. So this first element is calcium. So we write calcium all the way out. And then the second element is fluorine, but instead of putting the INE, we put IDE at the end of it. So it ends up being calcium fluoride. Let's look at our next one. Our first one is sodium. Na is sodium. And then we look at our Cl, that is chlorine, but instead of having that INE, we change it to IDE. So we have sodium chloride. And if we look at our next one, Ca, that's going to be our calcium. And then the Cl, that's going to be chloride. And then our last one, we have CaO. So we have calcium once again. And we'll have oxide. So calcium oxide. So ladies and gentlemen, if yours look like this, then you got yours absolutely correct. Good job. Now let's take a look at those bothersome transition metals. Transition metals can have more than one ion, but the good thing about them is that they will always show you what the ionic charge is. So for example, iron, which the symbol is Fe, it can have a +2 or a +3 charge, and it will be written like this. This will symbolize that it has a +2 charge, and this will symbolize that it has a +3 charge. So let's take a look at another one. So let's practice with the transition metals. So iron 3, which has a +3 charge, and oxygen has a -2 charge. The chemical formula ends up being Fe2O3, and I'll show you why. So we're going to use our cross method again. So iron has a +3 charge, oxygen has a -2 charge. When we cross our charges and bring them down to the bottom and make them subscripts, we end up with Fe2O3. And our chemical name is going to be iron oxide. So remember, you keep the full first name, and then on the second name, you take off the ending and put IDE. So now, ladies and gentlemen, I will give you 1 minute to practice a few, and I'll pause the video starting now. All right, great. So at this present point in time, we should have our problems set up and solved and written out. So now let's take a look at titanium. Titanium is a transition metal, but we notice right here, titanium has a +3 charge. And if we locate nitrogen on the oxidation chart, on the periodic table, nitrogen has a -3 charge. So a +3 and a -3, they cancel each other out. So when we write our chemical formula, it should be TiN, titanium nitride. Let's take a look at our next one. We have iron chloride. If we look, iron has a +3 charge, and chlorine has a -1 charge. So now +3 and a -1, they don't cancel each other out. But what we're going to do is we're going to cross our charges. So I'm going to bring my +3 here, bring my -1 here. So the symbol for iron is Fe, and the symbol for chlorine is Cl. But since I crossed my charges, I'm going to have a 1 right here, which I don't have to put, and I'm going to have a 3 right here for chlorine. And now let's take a look at our last one. Iron, once again, has a +3 charge, as identified right here, and sulfur has a -2 charge. A plus 3 and a negative 2 don't cancel out to 0, so we're going to use our cross method once again. Iron's chemical symbol is Fe. And we're going to put our 2 down here, right here. And then sulfur's chemical symbol is S. And so we're going to put a 3 right here. So the chemical formula ends up being Fe2S3. I know you did a wonderful job on this. Great job. So now, ladies and gentlemen, you have a 10-question quiz. You're going to write the chemical name for 1 through 5 and the chemical formula for 6 through 10. You have 2 minutes, and I'll pause the video now. So now, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look and see how you did. For this first one, we have MgF2, which ends up being magnesium fluoride. For our second one, we have ZnCl2, which ends up being zinc chloride. Our third one, K2O, potassium oxide. Our fourth one, Al2O3, which is aluminum oxide. Our fifth one, Na2S, which is sodium sulfide. So now let's look at the chemical formulas for these. So aluminum sulfide, aluminum has a plus 3 charge, sulfur has a negative 2 charge. When we cross our charges, we end up getting Al2S3. Iron has a plus 3 charge, bromine has a negative 1 charge, and so for number 7, we end up getting FeBr3 when we cross our charges. Let's look at number 8. Lithium plus 1 charge, oxygen negative 2 charge. We cross our charges and we end up getting Li2O. Number 9, beryllium chloride, beryllium plus 2 charge, chlorine a negative 1 charge. When we cross our charges, we end up getting BeCl2. And then for number 10, titanium has a plus 3 charge, phosphorus has a negative 3 charge, and those two charges cancel each other out. So we end up getting TiP. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope this tutorial was helpful, and I hope you did wonderfully on your quiz. Thank you for watching, and I am Travis Spivey, joined with my son Jordan Spivey. Peace, and have an awesome day.